So I saw this news report a while back that kind of struck a little bit of a nerve in me. And even though this might not be a thing in the media anymore, it made me think of the core differences between liberalism and conservatism, and also why conservatism is losing both in a political and a cultural sense. So let's talk about it. The other day, Unilever announced that they will no longer be using the word normal in their beauty products descriptions. According to Sunny Jain, president of Unilever's Beauty and Personal Care division, this is an important step towards creating a more inclusive definition of beauty. Unilever is one of the biggest multinational consumer good companies out there. You might not know the name Unilever itself, but you'll definitely know a few of the 400 companies they have under their umbrella. So what's the problem with them removing the word normal from their beauty products? Well, a lot, and on a deeper level than you might think. Hear me out. Saying something is normal, or saying there's such a thing as a norm, is seen by the progressives as something inherently bad. They say it excludes people who do not adhere to the norm, because putting a norm in place quite literally sets a certain standard. This obviously doesn't have to be a qualitative or a substantial standard, of course, but just saying this is the norm, that means that there are going to be instances in which people will not be the norm. They will either fall under it or maybe even exceed it, which means there will be a little thing called inequality. And we all know that in the minds of modern people, nothing sounds worse than inequality. This is due to the fact that the left has basically brainwashed us into believing that inequality is an inherently unfair thing. That's because they believe that normative thinking is a result of oppressive social constructs, usually put in place by white men to keep minorities small and powerless. The problem here is that that's a completely skewed and dishonest representation of reality. And if you ask me, it even gets to the core differences between progressives and conservatives. Conservatives acknowledge the fact that we as people need norms, rules, and generalizations in order to function, if we want a civilized and working society, that is. Conservatives believe that rules exist not because of some sort of oppressive social construct, but because they acknowledge a certain reality. And through trial and error, they try to create order in society so that we as human beings can function. Let me make this really tactile and concrete for a second. Think about traffic. Reality is that we have cars and we have pedestrians. So we're already making a differentiation between those two. We know that cars are stronger and more dangerous, so to speak, than pedestrians. So we created rules in order to make one stop for the other at given moments in time, aka through traffic lights and different lanes in the streets to take. We also have the police to enforce these rules, because if we don't stick to them, what do we get? Exactly, chaos. But back to a more abstract reflection. Let me take the differences between men and women. Conservatives will say, hey, you're a man, so you therefore generally have qualities A, B, C. And they'll say, hey, you're a woman, so you will therefore have qualities X, Y, Z. And the fact that both of you are different and that you have different qualities makes it pretty normal that you make different life choices. Progressives, however, will say the exact opposite. They will tell you that society says that you are different, but actually that it's all a social construct to create unequal positions of power, and that there is in fact no differences between men and women at all. So let's abolish all gender norms, roles, and characteristics, and everybody who does stick to them is an intolerant, bigoted sexist. Another lie from the left yet again. The fact that conservatives believe that there is such a thing as a norm obviously doesn't mean we're intolerant to the exception. Saying Europe's leading religion is and should be Christianity doesn't make you an Islamophobe. Saying men and women are and should be different doesn't mean you hate people who don't fully adhere to one or the other. And simply stating heterosexual relationships are the norm doesn't make you think homosexuality is bad. It just doesn't. A normative society isn't the problem. The opposite is. Trying to describe society without any norms, without any generalizations, Basically, a world without hierarchy, gender, and/or preferences. I mean, try it. You can't. You'll just end up with a chaotic mush of nothingness. But so why do we conservatives keep losing the fight both politically and culturally if this is a really obvious thing to a lot of people? Let me give you some examples to why. First of all, we don't have language on our side. Modern day speech and vocabulary lends itself better to the left. And of course, we all know the left has successfully controlled the words that we may and may not use in the public debate for ages. And also, leftist talking points just kind of sound better in the ears of modern people. As we've established in the beginning of this video, words like equality, solidarity, and diversity, they sound modern, they sound honorable, and even exciting. The word progressive in and of itself has clearly a positive connotation. Conservative sounds old, outdated, and even backwards in the ears of some people. But the real question is, has progressivism brought us progress? I mean, take a look at this. This is a building that was built in a time period that we call the Dark Ages. And we built that without electricity. Think about it. And then look at this building. This is something that we call modernity. And if you think about it, we have all the technology in the world and we're building this type of shit. How did we end up thinking this way? Well, because language is tied to culture, and the neoliberal right wing couldn't care less about culture. They'll always argue to leave it up to the market instead. But if you leave it up to the market in a society where people know nothing about where they're from and what their roots are, then you're going to leave it up to who? The left. And what do you get? Well, you get Netflix shows that glorify suicide, pedophilia, and anti-white sentiment. But at least you can watch it from a massive flat-screen TV with the highest resolution possible, right? All from the comfort of your own one-bedroom apartment, which more than half of your paycheck goes into every month. Because your 9-to-5 job gives you just enough money to pay for your expenses, own nothing, and to live happily alone. Congratulations, you are the perfect consumer. And are you feeling a little bit alone? Just go on Tinder. Did you get a date? Have some casual sex. Did you not get a date? Just watch some porn. Are you hungry? Order some foods from Uber Eats and have it delivered to your door by an undocumented migrant. Are you a bit bored? Watch a movie on Netflix. And the next day, you'll just do it all over again. But at least you're free, right? Yes, on the surface, liberalism looks and feels free and sexy because it gives you choices. But our lives are deeply regulated on every single level. And isn't it funny how most of our choices seem to benefit the woke capital every single time? And what about politicians? They can't go out and say, I want you to have less choices, even though it's obvious that liberalism is a trap and these are actually false choices. I mean, from something that might sound arbitrary, like removing the word normal from beauty products and banning plastic straws, we go to the government dictating when you're allowed to leave your own house, and what you can and cannot say on social media is regulated by big tech. Think about how many things in life are actually being decided for you without you having a say in it at all. I know for a fact that many people do feel this. They feel something is off. So many people feel lost right now. And maybe without being able to pinpoint it exactly, most people deep down feel like they're missing something. A sense of meaning and a sense of belonging. But many people don't even know how to put this in words, let alone actions, or they are afraid to, because the social consequences are real. The left is incredibly organized and has a global agenda. Conservatives, on the other hand, usually are fragmented and debate each other on the smallest nuances. And I mean, that's a good thing. That's how you get closer to the truth. But it can, therefore, also be hard to come out as a conservative because you'll often stand alone and you might even lose friends, sometimes even family. Because other than conservatives, the left is, in fact, highly intolerant to the exception. I don't think I've ever met a conservative who said, oh, you're a terrible person for thinking differently than I do. Or, oh, I really don't want to be your friend anymore because of your political opinions. It just doesn't happen. But God knows the other way around, it happens all the time. And trust me, I understand it's scary to go against the status quo, but you have to. Whilst the left have equality, solidarity, and diversity to offer, conservatism strives for the good, the true, and the beautiful. And honestly, conservative has more fun. We won't cancel you for a joke that you made over 10 years ago. We are not afraid to speak our minds, and we like the finer things in life. We're already winning in our private lives, but now is the time to take it to a societal level. So, go against the status quo, create beauty, and emphasize the best parts of a conservative mindset. You have thousands of years of history on your side. Let them have their Netflix shows, gender-neutral toilet, and safe spaces, and let's win. So I was in the Swedish National Museum here in Stockholm the other day, and what I thought was going to be a very nice experience surrounded by historical richness and beauty actually turned into a woke brainwashing session that drove me kind of crazy. So we all know how museums, they have these little description signs, right? Next to all the artworks in order to say something about the title and usually about the style of the work. Well, no longer. Nowadays, those have become apparently little manifestos in order for woke activists to indoctrinate you. Here, take a look at some of the examples that I saw. So this painting is called Jo, the Beautiful Irish Girl, and it was painted by French artist Gustave Courbet, also known for his world-famous self-portrait called The Desperate Man. But what does the Swedish National Museum want you to know about this painting? Maybe something about the artist and how he was a front-runner in the 19th century in terms of realism? Well, no, not quite. The National Museum actually wants you to know the following. Female models had low status, being viewed as little more than a commodity and the property of male artists. When Jo examined herself in the mirror, it was a vital act, as she was entirely dependent on her appearance to make a living. And it doesn't stop there. Whilst they're at it, they'll also lecture you a little bit about contemporary times, stating that, and I quote, "In the consumer culture of today, women are defined by their appearance, not allowed to age, and controlled by their weight." Yeah, it's almost admirable how much they managed to put crap into a description about just a really pretty portrait. First of all, I have to say, the person who wrote this clearly knows nothing about history. Let's start with the claim that female models had a low status, being viewed as little more than commodity and property of the male artist. Well, that's just blatantly wrong. Has the author in question ever heard of arguably the two most famous female models in the history of Western art, may I ask? Talking about Botticelli's Venus and Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, for example. The woman who modeled for Botticelli was actually Simonetta Vespucci, who was also known and celebrated as the greatest beauty of her time. She was an Italian noblewoman from Genoa and the wife of Marco Vespucci of Florence. So, yeah, same goes actually for Lisa Gherardini, aka Mona Lisa, who was also an Italian noblewoman and whose husband actually commissioned her portrait to be painted in the first place. Barely low in status or seen as a commodity and the property of the male artist, shall I say. Yet, the Swedish National Museum wants you to believe that for some reason, all female models are weak, exploited victims of the male gaze. If you think that I exaggerate, let me give you another example. So this is the pearl necklace, painted in 1870 by French artist called Charles Chaplin. The description next to this one at first seems a little less bad, I have to admit. I mean, at least they say something about the style and the technique used by the artist. But don't cheer too soon. Pay close attention to that one little sentence that goes, Chaplin was famous for erotic and objectifying female portraits. First of all, since when is eroticism in art a crime? And second of all, why objectifying? Why not call it maybe something like, I don't know, celebrating? See, that's the thing here. These leftists who dominate the art sector are imposing their own worldview on us without any historical or factual basis. And they don't limit themselves to, let's just say, misinterpreting the past. Because, sorry, but the previous take on how women in today's consumer society are defined by their appearance, not allowed to age, and controlled by their weight, well, that's just nonsense. I mean, come on, give me a break. We're not. At least those of us who see through your attempts to limit us to a life of perpetual victimhood, we are not. So please, do us all a favor. Go ahead and study again some gender theory and go and write something for a left-wing journal if you're into unfactual propaganda. But please, leave us and art alone. Generation Z, they're sad to be the saddest, loneliest, and most mentally fragile age group to date. How can it be that this generation, that is supposed to be the most liberated, social, and wealthy generation ever, is cursed with rising rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide? Where is youth culture heading? Let's talk about it. Before we dive into the problems surrounding Generation Z, I feel like I might have to make a little bit of a disclaimer here, that I'm fully aware of the fact that I'll probably be sounding like a total boomer all throughout this video. But actually, that's exactly the reason I wanted to do this video in the first place. I was talking to my younger brother and his friends the other day, and at times I quite literally felt like I couldn't really keep up with their conversations. I don't use the apps they use, the games they play, and frankly, they also seem to be interested in quite different things than what we were interested in right after we came out of high school. The age difference between me and my brother? Only 4 years. I was born in 1996, which makes me a bit of an in-betweener in a generational sense. But according to most sources, kids born in 1996 are in fact the last ones to be considered millennials. Everybody born after that, so from 1997 onwards, falls into that new category called Generation Z. So this made me wonder, why is there such a stark, noticeable difference between my generation and that of my only 4-year younger brother? One of the possible explanations that I could immediately think of must be smartphones. The first gadget that I used throughout my childhood was first a Walkman, then at some point an MP3 player, and eventually, which was really cool, an iPod. It wasn't until 2012 or so that smartphones became widely used. I remember that I was actually in my last year of high school when I got my first iPhone, and I posted my first picture on Instagram when I was 17. Most Generation Z kids, however, spent most of their childhood, or at least their puberty, with smartphones and tablets in their hands. So they've been exposed to the World Wide Web basically every single second of every single day. I mean, I don't have to tell you about the negative effects of social media. We all know that being bombarded with perfect images all the time doesn't do much good to teenagers who are going through puberty. Take self-image. I can honestly say that I'm incredibly happy that I didn't have to go through my ugly puberty phase in a time of Instagram. As we all know, Instagram is filled with influencers who have the perfect selfie game totally maximized. Highly unattainable body shapes, sometimes achieved through Photoshop, but also through cosmetic enhancement, especially seem to be an issue here. To an extent, this is something of all times. When I grew up, we looked at Hollywood actresses and singers, and we obviously dreamt of looking like them. But the fact that they were part of Hollywood gave them a sort of unattainability, which also distances your self-image from them in a way. Nowadays, girls look up to influencers that often don't influence anybody for the better. And anyone can nowadays become an influencer, of course. Looking like a Hollywood celebrity, therefore, is easy if you have the money to do so. Because everything that you can possibly think of nowadays can be tweaked. It's not about being just fat or skinny anymore, as I used to think when I grew up. The issue here is that these procedures, these cosmetic procedures, are widely accessible at this point. But sometimes, if they're done well, they're very, very hard to detect. Young girls growing up with Instagram can have sometimes even no idea whether someone is real or not, and whether they have to set a certain expectation for themselves based on the images that they're seeing. And clearly, I'm not the only one who's seeing this. This is a topic that's now actually quite trendy to talk about. Many of the woke feminists speak about these unattainable beauty standards as a problematic element of our patriarchal society. And so, of course, a counter movement has begun. But as per usual, the woke mob takes it too far, yet again, which has created this sort of really schizophrenic dichotomy between the perfect Instagram girls that we see everywhere and the everyone is beautiful the way they are type of slogans that we then see presented in the woke capital as well. And as per usual, the beauty industry, Hollywood, and fashion brands have all jumped on the bandwagon because it makes money. As we all know, you can't see a commercial anymore without it countering the patriarchal standard in some way, shape, or form. But apart from this quite visible effect, so to say, most of the effects of being on your phone all the time are more silent killers. The largest one, quite frankly put, is that it makes us antisocial and stupid. It's estimated that Generation Z spends up to a staggering 9 hours per day on their phones. And this was pre-COVID. With most of the Western world being in lockdown for over a year now, phone usage is estimated to have increased by 45% on top of that. But Generation Z really didn't need COVID to social distance. They were already doing it before. 54% of Generation Z report anxiety and nervousness, according to researchers at the American Psychological Association. This is compared with only 40% of millennials, which is clearly also very high, but still it's way closer to the 34% national average in the US. Naturally, Gen Z is therefore also less interested in things like alcohol, partying, and even sex. Although Gen Z is supposed to be the most sexually liberated generation to have ever lived, they are actually behaving quite socially conservative in real life. Not so much online though. Relatively new apps mostly used by Gen Z, like TikTok and OnlyFans, are primary examples of that. TikTok is filled with barely dressed, often underage girls, lip-syncing and doing stupid sexually tinted dances to pop music. OnlyFans is an app that allowed creators to sell their content to people who are willing to pay for personalized material. Basically, the app allowed people to sell their sexually graphic content to strangers on the internet. There are stories everywhere online of women that are saying that they earn over tens of thousands of euros a month from posting their nude content to OnlyFans. So the generation that is exposed to very sexually graphic images, songs, and films are in fact not interested in having sex themselves. Why would that be? The desensitization that is a consequence of non-stop phone usage doesn't just affect our social life. It affects our brain capacity too. One study found that mobile phone usage for as little as 5 minutes a day can cause significant memory impairment in humans. I mean, which makes sense. We don't have to remember anything. Where once repetition was the mother of knowledge, now Google is. And this clearly has an effect. 2-year-olds are able to unlock an iPad before they can form proper sentences, let alone before they can read. And because our attention span shrinks, people, especially younger generations, don't read much anymore. I know I myself am definitely guilty of this too, but the effects aren't to be underestimated. In the Netherlands, a fourth of all 15-year-olds now, according to normal standards, are deemed to be such bad readers that they cannot understand simple everyday texts. So, instead of encouraging kids to read, our institutions just lowered the bar. A recent example, a new edition of Anne Frank's diary has been published in simplified Dutch so that teenagers can better understand it. Mind you, Anne Frank herself started writing her diary when she was only 13 years old. And the thing is, the people who created all of these apps and these social media are well aware of the negative effects that they have on kids. And that's why they're making it a mission to keep it away from whom? Exactly, their own kids. Silicon Valley parents are sending their kids to expensive private schools where all forms of technology are banned. Another classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Clearly, Big tech controls content that we get to see on a daily basis, which can very much shape a person's worldview, especially when they're young. Although it's quite normal, of course, for young people to lean a little bit towards the left, Generation Z is, let's just say, very woke. According to Pew Research Center, Generation Z is progressive and pro-government. They see growing racial and ethnic diversity as a good thing, and they're less likely than older generations to see their home country as superior to other nations. A look at how Generation Z voters view Trump, for example, provides further insight in how they see the world. About a quarter of registered voters in the United States, ages 18 up to 23, approved of how Donald Trump handled his job as president, while about 3/4 disapproved. Gen Z sees themselves as being very politically aware. The issues they say to care most about are climate, racial inequality, and, surprise, feminism. But Gen Zers, listen up. Saying and doing the exact same thing big tech and the woke capital wants you to say and do doesn't make you a rebel. It makes you a useful idiot. Really, if you want to change society, you will have to do more than post a black square on your Instagram. Since in this post-truth society, we need to state the obvious time and time again, I'm going to go ahead and start off this video with a blatant truth once again. Ladies and gentlemen, newsflash, there are only two genders. Or actually, sexes, as I would prefer to call it. Because like I said in my last video about transgenders being allowed to compete into women's sports now, biology simply doesn't lie. And that's why everybody with a brain and a functioning set of eyes knows that when biological men can compete against women in sports like weightlifting, it's quite literally game over for us. So I'll just say it one more time. Well played, feminists, well played. But frankly, I can't believe that we're still caught up in this stupid debate. Every time I feel like we kind of moved past this, they come up with something even crazier. For example, here in Sweden, Försäkringskassan, which is the Swedish government social insurance agency, recently dropped the term woman when they are talking about people giving birth and about maternity leave. I know. Following the recent American debate about black birthing people, yeah, again, I know, the Swedes decided to listen very closely to their woke big brother and now have officially butchered their language to this ridiculous extent as well. And of course, this control of language isn't new. Like I said in my video about conservatives and how they're always losing the cultural and political war, the left institutions rule the way that we are allowed to speak. The UN, for example, dictates to its staff how to communicate in a quote-unquote gender-inclusive way. You've probably seen all these examples before, but I just have to show them to you again, because most of them are not just insane, they're also incredibly stupid from an etymological standpoint. Take man in mankind or human. That doesn't refer to man in the sense of male. It literally refers to a plural, like the meaning of human suggests, or to a person in general. In Dutch, we would say mens. But anyway, saying birthing person, I have to say, is kind of a new low, right? Especially because, well, giving birth is quite literally exclusive to women. Actually, if you had to name one thing that differentiates women from men, it's that we give birth and men can't. I can't believe that I still even have to say this. I mean, how on earth is this now a controversial thing? Since when did we deter from the idea that language should reflect reality? It's actually why we have words like men and women to begin with. The fact that this whole debate has escalated this far and that we as conservatives are now debating whether transgender should or should not take part in the Olympics kind of says it all. I think Matt Welch actually put it really well in one of his latest tweets. He said, and I'll quote, "If the right gives up the gender fight, then that's it. It's over. Once we've surrendered reality itself, what else is there left to fight for? Tax cuts? I will die on this hill If this hill is lost, there are none worth keeping after it, and nobody left to fight for them anyway. End of the quote. Sounds intense, right? Being willing to die on that hill. But I mean, the guy is right. Because if we go along with their reality, which is actually not reality at all, but just their made-up little dream world in which everything is fluid and nothing really exists, then we as conservatives have really quite clearly gone too far. So where did all of this lunacy come from? Well, let me tell you. Gender theory is a new concept that was first introduced in the 1960s. With her famous sentence, "On ne naît pas femme, on le devient," French existentialist Simone de Beauvoir laid the first stone for what would later be called, and now is called, gender theory. Third-wave feminists, such as Judith Butler, saw that sentence by de Beauvoir as the starting point of the separation of the concept of sex and gender. Whereas sex is about a biological, anatomical reality, gender is a social construct that dictates what is seen in society as masculine and male and feminine and female. De Beauvoir argued that a woman is not merely a woman on the basis of her biology, which she is obviously has known from birth, but that she becomes a woman later in life through certain roles that were assigned to her, so to say, womanhood. So what we perceive to be typically male or female is, according to her, not innate at all, but these behaviors are just imposed onto us by society. Sounds familiar, right? We hear that type of argumentation all the time nowadays, especially when it's about breaking free from these so-called stereotypical gender roles. Like most things that the left proposes, this doesn't really sound that bad at first. But you always have to keep in mind the argument of the slippery slope every time that the left comes up with something new. In this case, the consequences of denying the importance of biology in relation to the determination of one's sex aren't to be underestimated. For example, one page into her book, Judy Butler immediately brings up the question about a person's own individual construction of gender. And well, clearly, from that moment onwards, when it's about somebody's individual perception, the door of infinite possibilities in terms of gender is just wide open. Based on the idea that not biology, but only society, or ultimately even one's own choice or perception determines reality, a sexuologist named John Money started an experiment in the last century that I honestly can only classify as pure evil. John Money was the first ever scientist that started an experiment raising a child as a different gender than the sex that it was born with. He used a boy for this experiment that was called Bruce Reimer. And this kid was severely mutilated as an infant during circumcision, after which Money recommended Bruce's parents to raise him as a girl from that moment onwards, since Money was convinced that gender was only a social construct anyway. So baby Bruce underwent testicular removal, received female hormonal therapy, and was renamed Brenda. And the thing is, Bruce was never actually told that he was born a man. However, from a very young age, Bruce reached for typical boy toys, wanted to climb and scramble in trees, and refused to wear the dresses that his mother tried putting him in. During the rest of his childhood, Bruce and his twin brother Brian were also subjected to sexual experiments in which Money made the two little brothers perform sexual acts on each other. And finally, when Bruce reached the age of 14, Money suggested to go on with the sex change, so basically to give Bruce a vagina. Bruce, who was already suffering from deep depression at that age, threatened to commit suicide if he ever had to go back to see Dr. Money. Eventually, Bruce was told the truth about his biological sex and was, so to say, surgically restored. Eventually, David, which is the name that he chose after he transitioned from female back to male, committed suicide, just like his brother, in their late 30s. You would think that after hearing about this evil experiment, the theory of gender being a social construct would have been completely and officially rejected. But the opposite is actually true. Money lived on as a rather respected scientist up until his death in 2006. And gender studies, as you all know, and the concept of gender neutrality have gained significant grounds in both the political and the academic debate. One of the most weighty arguments seems to be that gender neutrality prevents non-binary people, so people who do not fully identify as either male or female, from being excluded. Also, a popular argument within this debate is that traditional binary gender roles would be harmful to the individual. The answer to both of these problems? Yeah, there you have it, gender neutrality. So that's why we now see those endless calls for gender neutral language, toilets, colors, upbringing, education, you name it. And of course, it doesn't stop there. In May 2018, a Dutch court gave the green light for the first ever gender neutral identity card. According to the court, there was an, and I quote, infringement of private life, self-determination, and personal autonomy when a gender non-conforming person is forced to have either an F, so female, or M, male, on their identity card. So what did the Dutch decide to do? They just removed gender from identity cards altogether. Because apparently it's more important for our legal system to be woke than to have proper form of identification. And let's just face it, in identification, sexual characteristics are quite essential. The Polish government, however, didn't exactly follow suit. Poland has actually recently decided to reject an EU mandate to add the third gender X, so to say, to the national identity cards of the country. With me in the studio today to give further comment on this is member of the City Council of Warsaw for the party PIS, so the Law and Justice Party, Michał Szpandrowski. Michał. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, my dear friends. When I was asked to talk about the state of conservatism in the Netherlands, I joked that it would be my shortest speech ever. Because frankly, sadly, conservatism in my country, the Netherlands, barely exists. As some of you here might remember, 10 months ago when I came to Sweden for the first time, I talked about your country as the epicenter of political correctness. I described Sweden as a country that is more worried about the gender-neutral education of their children than about the fact that mass migration has turned its territory in the second most dangerous country in Europe. To me, Sweden was a primary example of what not to do. But let me tell you something. My country is no better. Actually, I think my country is far worse off than yours, because we don't have a conservative movement like the one that Matthias Carlsson, my dear friend, has been able to establish here. To the majority of the people in this world, my home country is known as the country of legalized drugs, euthanasia, prostitution, and gay marriage. And you know what? I can't tell them that they're wrong. Holland has gone from a nation that was once a ruling power in this world to now a country that does exactly what Germany tells us to do. Don't get me wrong, I'm a great patriot. I love my country. But the greatness, the entrepreneurship, and the fighting spirit that we once had is now nowhere to be found. And that's not just the case for Holland or for Sweden. It's the case for our entire Western civilization. It's suffering, and as some might say, it's dying. So I could spend these 20 minutes here giving you an overview of all of the marginal, tiny conservative movements and parties that we have that are trying to do something. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not here to tell you why Holland doesn't have a conservative movement. I'm here to tell you why we, like the rest of the Western world, are in need of one more than ever before. Let me start off by saying that conservatives aren't easily definable. The conservative movement here in Europe has different nuances and tones depending on where you find it. Most Western, Northwestern conservatives, like us, are quite different from the ones that we find in the east of Europe or in the south. And understandably so, of course. I mean, what is more natural than to want to defend your own national heritage, especially in a time of radical demographic change, mass migration, and cultural decay? But let's zoom out of the realm of national policies for a second. Let's ask ourselves what unites us conservatives, what we want in life, and what we care about. Generally speaking, I would say that conservatives, real conservatives, deeply care about the three transcendentals. We care about the good, the true, and the beautiful. Of course, we can debate each other endlessly about what the substance of these three concepts should be. But I don't think that at this point in time, that's what really matters. What matters is that we believe in the concept of them. We believe that there is something as morality, that there is something as truth, and that there is something as beauty. You see, we believe in the metaphysical concept of these things. But we are a dying breed. Why? Because there is an institutionalized attack carried out on everything that we believe to be fundamentally important and even just normal. This attack has been so successful that we're left with an entire generation of people that is no longer able to trust its own judgment and the reality that they perceive with their own eyes. At least not in a common sense way that our forefathers have done for thousands and thousands of years on end. We've all seen and heard the examples. We've seen that Facebook has listed 73 genders for you to choose from. We've seen people advocate now that 2 + 2 = 4 is a racist concept. What was once up is now down, and vice versa. But what are the real-life consequences of living in this upside-down world? What is the fate of a society that is no longer able to acknowledge the value of traditional wisdom and thinking? A popular saying goes, believe in nothing and you'll fall for anything. And as much as this might sound like a cliche, I think it's actually very true. The permanent state of confusion, disorientation, and isolation that Western man now lives in is exactly the fate that the global elites have in mind for us. Customs, craftsmanship, tradition, all of these things that used to be the landmarks for Western men that gave us guidance, a sense of self, identity, they've all been willfully attacked and some might say destroyed. It's not difficult to guess why, though. The global elites want to turn us into docile, mindless consumers who listen to what they say and buy what they offer. They achieve this by controlling the institutions, the media, the big tech companies, which have successfully been turned into institutes and instruments of proper brainwashing and uprooting. And here we are. We live in a world where stating that there are just 2 sexes can get you hunted down and fired from your job. We live in a world where saying that immigration should be controlled and gone through legal routes can get you branded as a far-right extremist. We live in a world where opposing the teaching of critical race theory in schools might get you labeled by the President of the United States as a potential domestic terrorist. But it doesn't stop there. Cancel culture, that was until now mainly exercised by political activists, is now rapidly becoming part of our legal system. In Holland, a law has recently come into effect that makes it possible for our legal system to ban so-called anti-democratic and subversive organizations. A judge can order the cessation of these organizations, allocate their funds to the state, and put members in jail up for 2 years. And who do you think these so-called subversive organizations are? Violent anti-fascists who terrorize their opponents? Islamic extremists who bomb people in the street? Not quite. Ladies and gentlemen, just this week, our National Security Agency came forward with a statement that the biggest national threat that we should be looking at right now is far-right extremists in the form of young people talking online. Ladies and gentlemen, so far I've tried to convey 2 points to you. First, the coordinated attack on our identity, culture, and traditions in order to uproot Europeans from their sense of self. And second, the ever-growing infiltration of the state into our private lives. Uprooting people, confusing them, isolating them, and making them completely dependent on you is, of course, a fantastic strategy if you want to stay in power. We conservatives, we know this better than anyone. We've been fighting their globalist Marxist agenda for years. Own nothing and you'll be happy, they said. Whilst they've been printing money into oblivion, resulting in you and I having ever less purchasing power. Multiculturalism will enrich your life, they said, whilst our country's changed beyond recognition in less than 10 years. We should all be feminists, they said, as they pit the sexes against each other and shame people for wanting traditional lives. We have all been fighting this. As a matter of fact, we've been talking about basically nothing else for these past 2 days. But if I'm being honest, all of these discussions seem completely trivial to me at this time. Sure, I can talk about woke terror in universities. I can talk about cancel culture and about the fact that the left-wing media is mean to me. But why would I talk about wokeness in university if soon I am not legally allowed to enter a university? Why would I talk about protecting our national heritage if soon I can't legally enter a museum? Why would I talk about purchasing power when soon I can't legally enter a restaurant, a store, or even my workplace in order to make that money that I need to do those things to begin with? Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is my reality. And it's the reality of the 1.5 million of my fellow countrymen who have refused to take an experimental vaccine that most of them do not need. We have officially been made into second-class citizens. We aren't just experiencing the kind of social exclusion that we conservatives have been fighting for years. We are experiencing actual, legal exclusion from everyday life in a way that has been absolutely unprecedented up until, well, that last time. And I know that I might make you uncomfortable by saying that. I know that's not something that you want to hear. I'm pretty sure that most of you want to believe that I'm exaggerating even. And that's exactly the problem. As Baudelaire once said, the greatest trick that the devil has ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And that's exactly right. The biggest danger that threatens the West right now is the fact that we wouldn't recognize totalitarianism if it hit us in the face. We believe that the things that happen elsewhere in the world would never happen here in the Free West. But they will, and they already are. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they're boiling the frog, and I hate to bring it to you, but we're the frog. And don't be fooled. Don't think that because you are vaccinated, that this won't affect you. If you do, you're being dangerously short-sighted. Because we need to think about what the precedent is that's being set here. We need to think about the tendencies that are below this, that are unfolding right in front of our eyes. Our most fundamental constitutional rights are being set aside without an end date, and you best believe that no human rights agency is fighting for us. Those natural God-given rights that we thought we had, like medical privacy, freedom of movement, and bodily integrity, boom, out of the window. All under the pretext of public health, of course. And boy, isn't it smart. Because who wants to be against public health? We all want to protect other people from dying, right? The goal sounds good. It sounds noble. But if you allow any pretext that sounds noble to set aside your constitutional rights, then you have no constitutional rights. But the people who rule us do not want you to see this. They want to pit people against each other. They want to incite fear. They want to divide and conquer. I guess what I'm saying is, don't think that they won't do this to you. If we accept the fact that a QR code grants us access to society, what makes you think that they won't link that to anything else except for your vaccination status? What if that green screen on your phone that grants you access to society turns red the moment you take a flight too many? Or you eat meat too much? Or you didn't recycle your plastic yesterday, how dare you? What if that green screen on your phone that is linked to your digital wallet that's filled with nothing more but, I'm going to say it, central bank digital currencies, will turn red the moment you say something that the government classifies as hate speech? What if they can turn off your life at the push of one button? If they can do it in China, they can do it here. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom that is limited to those who do and say exactly what the government wants them to do and say is no freedom. It's freedom it's imprisonment dressed up as freedom. And we need to see it for what it is. If we want to turn this around, that is. We need to wake up. We need to speak up. We need to say no, draw a line, and disobey these laws. Because lex injusta non est lex. Because when something as fundamental as our freedom is at stake, then just hoping that things will turn out all right is not enough. We don't just have the duty to protect our past from destruction. We conservatives have the duty to protect our future from destruction too. Thank you very much. Some months ago, I was at a conference at a conservative think tank in Sweden, together with Joram Zoni. In my speech there, I spoke about the tyrannical COVID measures and how I felt that the dangers of the QR society were much more prevalent than most people thought. In that speech, I spoke openly about God, stating that our God-given rights, like bodily integrity, were heavily being violated by the vaccine mandates. After the conference later that day, we, Joram and I, had a discussion with some of our Swedish conservative friends, and they told me that talking about God in Sweden or in any other Northwestern European country would make you lose about 90% of your audience and should be avoided at all costs. Well, Joram and I took a different stance, and that stance is exactly the one that I want to talk to you about today. Let me tell you right away. Not only do I disagree with the statements that conservatives shouldn't openly and unapologetically talk about God, I also think the very reason we are losing some of the most important battles right now is precisely because we've lost track and sight of God. But before I get further into that, let me start off by saying that, as you can tell from my example about Sweden, and probably from many of the people that you've met today, that conservatives aren't necessarily easily definable. Conservatism in Europe knows many nuances and different tones depending on where you find it. Our neighbors in the south or in the east might be quite different than us ourselves in here in Northwestern Europe. And that's understandable, of course, because what is more natural than wanting to defend your own, your national heritage, your national identity, and your culture? Especially, of course, in a time of rapid cultural decay, mass migration, and demographic change. But let's zoom out of the realm of national policies for a second. What unites us conservatives? Generally speaking, I would say that all real conservatives care deeply about the three transcendentals: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And of course, we can debate each other endlessly about what the substance of those three things might be. But what I think is most important is the fact that we think there is such a thing as morality, that there is such a thing as the truth, and that there is such a thing as beauty. You see, we believe in the concept of these things, the metaphysical idea behind them. But we are a dying breed.
Customs, craftsmanship, religion, tradition, all landmarks that used to give Western men some sort of guidance and a sense of identity have been under massive attack, and some might say even willfully destroyed. And as a result, we now live in a globalized world without any physical or moral borders, leaving most of us permanently confused, disoriented, and isolated. And ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly the fate that the globalist neoliberal elites have in mind for us. And it's not so difficult to guess why. Uprooted, lost people are easy to control. They want to turn us into docile consumers that buy what they offer and do what they say. And so far, they've been quite successful at it. Things that were once up were now down, and vice versa. We've all heard the examples, one most recently, of course, being the one that we just talked about of the man that just won the NCAA swimming championship, female championship. And of course, this is just one of many examples. We all know that the list of left-wing idiocracies is endless. But I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that we have something bigger to worry about than the gender madness and other progressive projects. We are dealing with an enemy that doesn't just want to brainwash us. We are dealing with an enemy that wants to get into our brains. An enemy that wants to play God. Because the fact of the matter is that the globalists who want to make us believe that everything is a social construct won't stop there. They want to make us believe that even life itself is a construct, one that they can design and, of course, therefore, control. And like all other things, they will bring this to us under the guise of equality and other noble pretexts, such as public health. Because if there's one thing that we have seen and that we can take away from the past 2 years, it's that people have been shown to be incredibly willing to give up their freedom in order to be protected by the state. And this is no surprise, of course. With the decline of Christianity, people have become increasingly afraid of the afterlife, or rather, the lack thereof. And that is why, if there is one thing that modern man is nowadays incredibly afraid of, it's death. So protecting public health, of course, sounds like an amazing, noble goal. And it is therefore an incredibly effective tool in gaining control over millions of citizens. But what if the elites offer us something more than just protection from death with their vaccine passports? Well, what if they can promise us not just protection of death from death, but the eradication of death itself? Well, that's where transhumanism comes in. Transhumanism promotes the view that the human species should take control over its own evolution through technology. Technologies such as brain implants, genetic engineering, and nanotechnology, eventually allowing for us humans to become immortal in the cloud, but not that cloud. Promising us paradise on Earth, the most rich and powerful people on the planet are currently working on tools that will alter human nature forever. I know that all of you know Elon Musk, and I know that you all know him from Tesla, right? The self-driving cars. But have you ever heard of the concept or of the name Neuralink? I see some people are nodding, but I see loads of people who don't. Well, let me tell you, Neuralink is one of Elon Musk's other projects, and it's a chip that can be implanted into the brain, convert your brain activity, so mind you, those are your thoughts, into a digital form and have them seriously uploaded to that cloud. And of course, also Elon Musk sells this Neuralink as something that could be beneficial to public health, stating that the chip could address brain or spinal injuries and make up for whatever lost capacity someone might have. So next time, and I know some of you like him because of the base things he says on Twitter, please think about that too. And not just Neuralink. What about human ectogenesis, or growing a baby outside of the woman's womb? Well, that's already on the way. Chinese scientists reportedly already have created an artificial womb for fetuses to safely grow in what they call a robotic nanny. Not a mother, a nanny. And we all know already that soon women will be sold this new fantastic advancement by saying, well, you won't have to suffer through those debilitating 9 months of back pain and swollen feet, and you won't have to take a break from your career anymore. This is all part of the so-called fourth industrial revolution, which entails the blurring of boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological world. And that revolution is very much taking place as we speak. In fact, most of the response to the pandemic has relied on fourth industrial revolution technologies, such as genetic sequencing, vaccine biotechnology, and contact tracing, aka mass surveillance software. And if you still believe that all of this is for the greater good and it won't be used against us, then I have to say I'm sorry, but you're being dangerously naive. Transhumanism will be presented to us as the Holy Grail, but in fact, it's the poisoned chalice. I can imagine that some of you still might be thinking that I'm exaggerating this, but well, the reality is that I'm not the one saying it, they are. All we have to do is listen. For example, some years ago at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, Yuval Noah Harari said, and I quote, "Soon corporations and governments will be able to hack all people. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life. Science is replacing evolution with intelligent design, not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design," end of quote. Bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, we don't take our enemies seriously enough. We can't seem to imagine that there are people on this earth who want to create a new human, a new world that is evil. As Baudelaire once said, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. And he was right. Because how do we expect to win a war against enemies that we don't even see for what they are? Well, if we don't see it, we won't win that war. But yet there is solace and there is hope. Because what happens when humans try to change their nature? All you have to do is think about the story of Icarus. He thought he could change his human nature and fly to the sun. And what happened to him? He came crashing down. So in the end, especially us Christians who believe in God, we know that playing God never has worked and it never will work. Evil will perish in the end. But that's no reason to sit back right now, because the evil that we're facing has the potential to take control over millions of people on an unprecedented scale for a very long period of time. So standing by isn't an option. So what should we do? Well, the older I get, the less I believe that this is a matter of left and right. We don't need something smaller. No, we need something much greater than globalism, something much greater than transhumanism. We need the greatest. We need God. Religion will be the only... Religion will be the only antidote to the evils of transhumanism and globalism. And sadly, I really don't believe that anything else will cut it. We are fighting such a large evil that only with him on our side, and we do have him on our side because we have the truth on our side, we will win this fight. But if we spend our energy on hiding him, because we might lose some people in our audience, well then why would he be there for us? I've often heard conservatives say, oh, but Christianity in the West, it's done. We can't get the youth, we'll scare them off. Well, we might, but we are a civilization at the brink of extinction. And we can go argue that we can save this all with secular liberal values, but we've been doing that for decades, and how is it working for us? I refuse to compromise on this, and I think that that is exactly the type of mindset that young people crave nowadays. In a world where everything is limitless, gray, and vague, giving a clear answer is the most liberating thing that you can do. And the beautiful opportunity that we have at hand here, ladies and gentlemen, is that, exactly as we've heard from our other speakers today, most young people, people of my generation in Northwestern Europe or in Europe and America too, hardly know anything about God, Christianity, and the church. But that gives us an opportunity. We are much more of a blank slate than the generation of our parents who rebelled against the church because they were grown up in the spirit of the 68 ans. But how do we expect to have people turn to God and the truth if we don't introduce them to them? The Bible says the truth will set you free. So will we embrace the lies and globalism and watch Europe destroy itself from within? Or will we embrace the truth and fight for it? I know what we should do. Thank you very much.
I am European, and I am proud. I am proud of our unparalleled history, culture, and diversity. I am proud of what we have achieved as a civilization. But Europe as we know it, in all its richness and greatness, is under threat by a false representation of our history, present, and future. We are being told lies about who we were, who we are, and who we should be. And those lies need to be challenged. We can no longer just stand by and watch our politicians sell out our home and have the media cover it up for them. There are just too many uncomfortable truths about what's happening in Europe that are simply not being addressed. And that's the first step we need to take. And we need to take it now.
A week or two back, there was a big national conservatism conference in Brussels, and one speech in particular tickled my fancy.
In that speech, I spoke openly about God, stating that our God-given rights, like bodily integrity, were heavily being violated by the vaccine mandates. After the conference later that day, we, Joram and I, had a discussion with some of our Swedish conservative friends, and they told me that talking about God in Sweden or in any other Northwestern European country would make you lose about 90% of your audience and should be avoided at all costs.
That was Dutch lawyer Eva Vlaard Megamix, and we're now going to test that Swedish alleged conservative nostrum and kiss off 90% of the audience by talking about God in the rubble of what we used to call Christendom. Great to see you, Eva. Just let me know how, first of all, how did that speech go down in Brussels?
Hi, Mark. Good to see you. Well, actually, surprisingly well. I didn't lose 90% of my audience there, so I think we proved it right then and there that it was a false statement. But let's see how it goes with your ratings right now.
Well, you made the point, because you basically posited it as God versus globalism, and you see globalism as a kind of religion for so-called progressives. Because, the transcendent meaning of life used to be God and heaven. And now for these guys, it's that you're saving the planet because of climate change. So the Maldives won't be over flooded with water in the next century or whatever. In other words, globalist policies give meaning to lives on the left.
Right, exactly. They give meaning to life on the left, and not just do they give meaning, and so do they sort of, do they form like basically a sort of a way of going around the fact that we don't live in a world anymore where morality, where Christianity rules, or where it's clear for people what is right and what's wrong. Actually,
The left has completely destroyed that with all of these moral vagueness, all this idea that everything is subjective. You know, the left has said, global ideas say everything in life is a social construct. Gender is a social construct, for example, right? But what I said in that speech is that now, not only do they say, oh, life or gender, things in life that we find normal are only social constructs and can be changed to our will. No, life itself is also a social construct. And that's what I see as one of the largest dangers now of the globalist agenda, and that is, in the end, is transhumanism.
Yeah, that's well, we're already seeing there the suggestion that they can put a chip in you that enables you to buy a coffee at Starbucks or whatever. It seems like an odd road to be going down. It seems like the first step to transhumanism in a way. But what I think is true is that on the right there is also a hostility to God, because conservatives of one kind or another think that ship has sailed, God is over, and we can't do anything by fighting on that turf. But you actually, I thought, made a very sharp point against that.
Right. No, they say, like my Swedish conservative friends, for example, who say, especially when it comes to the youth, we can't speak about Christianity, you know, that will scare them off. They'll say that's scary, that's a fairy tale book, something that we can't believe in. But I think that it's the opposite. So what they do, what the conservatives have a tendency to do, is focus on national policy. But focusing on national policy, for example, when it comes to, well, the COVID mandates, you know, chips in your hands, all these things, they're all pretty convenient, right? You could argue on national level that that's good for citizens. But what you have to do is take it to a way higher level and say, no, actually, we don't need something that's smaller than globalism. We need something that is greater. We need something that presents us with a clear message of the truth, of good moral values, that I think is something that young people who nowadays don't really have any idea of what, you know, Christianity is about, what God is about, what the church is about, they're more of a blank slate to that, so to say, than, for example, the generation of my parents who rebelled against their parents, and who rebelled against, well, who were all in this sort of spirit of the soissons militaires, you know? So I think that young people are way more open to the idea of Christianity, actually, than we might think.
What do you make of this pedo chic, Eva?
Гурт «Время и стекло».
Руками разведу я над головою тучи. Я люблю, а ты мне даришь гуси. И я боюсь, что завтра ты мне подаришь правда. Мне ничего не надо, разве что Баленсиага. Баленсиага.
Ага, Баленсиага. Ага, Баленсиага.
И я боюсь, что завтра ты мне подаришь правда. Мне ничего не надо, разве что Баленсиага. Баленсиага.
Ага, Баленсиага. Ага, Баленсиага.
Баленсиага.
Ага, Баленсиага. Не хочу нажить тебе фэшн врага.
Всякий случай, Луи, Дольче, Фенди, Гуччи.
И of course, Michael Kors.
Well, that it's disgusting, obviously. And not just disgusting, it's demonic, quite frankly, because it doesn't just stay with some teddy bears in bondage gear. And some of the other photos that Balenciaga put out in this same ad, they had actual tape there with a misspelling of Balenciaga. In this case, Balenciaga, meaning Baal, a reference to the demon to whom children were sacrificed. So there is a lot of sinister stuff going on. Another thing that they had in the photos was a court case about child pornography that was actually struck down by the Supreme Court in the United States. So this can't just be a coincidence. These people are openly promoting, openly flirting with child pornography and pedophilia. That's what this is, and they're not even trying to hide it anymore. It's purely satanic. That's what it is.
Well, let me ask you this, Eva. What do you make of all the people who worked on this shoot? The stylists, the photographer? I don't regard myself as someone inclined to get on his moral high horse, but if I turned up for a shoot like this and there's a 7-year-old girl there, and again, she's being framed so that the champagne flutes and wine glasses are clearly intended for her, and the bondage paraphernalia is also part of the act. I'd say, wait a minute, she's 7 years old. Call me back when you got someone over 11. I'm out of here. Why did none of these guys do this?
Yeah, that would have been the normal response. But the fact that nobody did that, again, shows you that this was all intentional. Everybody was in on it. And the fact that Balenciaga is now trying to sue the people who put this set up for, I think, $25 million is just absolutely ridiculous and laughable. They were completely in on it. There were too many coincidences in this ad campaign for it to be in any way, shape, or form intentional. It is the devil who's wearing Balenciaga, and it's the devil who's hiding in plain sight with this ad. So just boycotting Balenciaga to me really isn't enough when it's about this type of evil. These people should be criminally prosecuted, really.
Is it correct to discern from certain trends in the culture that that rehabilitating pedophilia is going to be the next big thing, that normalizing pedophilia is going to be the next big thing, Eva?
I think there's no doubt. I mean, if you throw all morality out of the window, then you accept the slippery slope of things like this happening. And we've already seen people on the left, feminists, talking about pedophilia as a sexual preference instead of an illness or something that's completely criminal. Right. So this is definitely the next step. And here they're doing it so openly, they're not even trying to deny it anymore. So I think within the next couple of years, of course, we're going to be talking about whether that's just a different kind of love, unless people speak up about this now. And the fact that Hollywood, for example, is not doing it should tell you everything that you need to know.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button.
Your description is right. The Netherlands consists of a really nice people. We have great people here, but we have a terrible government. Our government consists of a bunch of liars and inhumane thieves. So what they're doing actually now is, on the basis of EU regulations surrounding nitrogen emissions, our government is going to expropriate our farmers. And they're actually going to expropriate over 3,000 farms until 2030. And so this is all under the guise, again, of this nitrogen crisis, which frankly is nothing but a manufactured crisis. It doesn't exist apart from on paper. And all of these people, the Dutch farming industry is a huge industry. We are an incredibly tiny country, but we are the second largest exporter of agricultural products after the United States. I mean, that is something. We are good at this stuff. And a lot of farmers have been in this business, not just themselves, but their ancestors, oftentimes for centuries on end. And now suddenly we have a government that says, oh, there's climate change. And by the way, you are going to have to give up your land, not to the market, not for you to keep it, but for you to give it to us. So that should tell you everything that you need to know. There is a hidden agenda behind this, and it has two facets, I would say. The Dutch government needs more land because we have an ever-growing population, not because the Dutch people are having a ton of babies, but because we have open borders and we have about 1,000 migrants coming in every single week. 300,000 we had this year coming in. So we have a housing crisis.
Wow.
New houses need to be built. Where are you going to put those people, right? Everything is completely full. So they need new land. That's one thing that they now want the farmers gone for. Obviously, they're not saying that, but it is the truth. And the second thing I think is that this is a general tendency that you see all throughout the Western world. There's an attack on farmers, I think, because farmers pose a threat to the globalist institutions that want to push something like the Great Reset. If you control the food supply, you control the people. And farmers obviously stand in the way of that. They are a very independent group that function self-sufficiently besides the government. And you can't have that if you are trying to control people and their food supply. So there is a very sinister agenda, once again, hiding behind this. And the result is that we now have a government that thinks that once they say it, you are just going to have to give up your property. These are your rights that are being taken away, in this case, the farmers' rights, under the pretext of, again, a crisis that they can just create out of thin air.
The farmer that we spoke to said the farmers who are being targeted, some 3,000 of them are being offered 120% the value of their land. And I don't know how they figure out the value, how they, I'm going to guess that they're getting lowballed on that assessment. But how do they expect the farmers to live on an ongoing basis? You get a one-time payout. And then how do you continue paying your bills unless that's a massive number, like winning the lottery, that you can just retire on from now to the, it could be decades that you're still around and alive and need to support yourself and your family. So how do they expect the farmers to live on?
They don't give a rat's ass, excuse my French, but really our government doesn't care about the interests of its own people. It caters to a different agenda. It caters to the European Union. It caters to, obviously in this case, not democratically unelected people. The people who are pushing this in those institutions, in the European Union, are people that nobody ever voted for. So whatever happens to those farmers is none of our government's concern, clearly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. They would be listening to the farmers, their pleas, and also to people in general who have stood up against this and all of the protests and the international outrage that it has caused. Clearly, this government does not play by the rules. They don't care about your rights. They don't care about you. They don't care if you starve. I almost feel like that is the goal if you see what they are doing in a time where there's already a lot of issues with the food supply, with the supply chain in general. Why on earth would you start attacking farmers in this time? Right.
And literally, it's getting close to attacking. The farmers got out there and protested. And you know what it takes to make a farmer go out and protest? For the most part, they want nothing to do with this kind of public display. They tend to be more private people. They farm their land. They are in touch with nature and God in a way that a lot of people aren't. But they're upset and they're out there and the protests are being disbanded. They're not allowed, right? They've got to move on. They can't have their say. I don't know. It just kind of reminds me of when they cracked down on the truckers in Canada. It's like when you see truckers come out and look at this and try to make a point, or you see farmers come out and try to make a point. Can't they have their moment? Like let them say their piece, Eva.
Yeah, well, no, even in the summer, they even shot at them, and they shot at a 16-year-old boy that was there at the protest, actually driving away from the protest scene. So, the whole concept, again, our government does not respect fundamental rights, does not respect property rights. They don't care about these farmers whatsoever. They just want the land. So none of the rules that used to be in place are valid anymore. Our government just does what it wants. And so this is not liberal democracy. They can say that, but if you're only allowed to protest when the government says it's all right, then you obviously don't have a right to protest. And that's exactly what's going on here. You would expect this maybe in China or in other far ends of the world,
Yeah.
but not in Western liberal democracies. But then again, I don't think that we can say that we have that anymore when this is our reality.
Everyone, welcome back. Today I have a very special interview for you with the extremely lovely and intelligent Eva Vlaard Megamix.
And they continued on with it. So what they then do, it's the typical strategy always with these people, is they'll start vilifying the protesters in the media, which happens. The mainstream media is now talking about how the farmers are quite literally turning into terrorists. That those are the types of words that they use. And so they basically hope that the public opinion on the farmers shift, and they drag it out. So they said over the summer, they said, we're gonna revise the plan. We're gonna come back with you with a new proposal. And that's what they did a couple of weeks ago. They came back with a new proposal that wasn't new at all. It was just nicer in tone. So, it was like they just hid certain things a little better. They used kinder words. And then down the line, it was actually worse. Now they don't say, okay, we're cutting 30% of all the livestock before 2030. We're just going to now target the top emitters. That's what they said. So the companies, they say companies now, not farmers, but companies that emit the most nitrogen. And those are going to go first, which will amount to over 600 farmers being shut down in the next year.
Wow.
So not even 2030 now, just like, okay, we're going to target very specific groups and we're going to forcefully buy them out first.
Why is it that you think the Dutch government are specifically targeting the Dutch farmers? Because, why are they getting all of the blame for this? Because, for example, cars also emit nitrogen. So why not ban all of the cars then? If they're really serious about this climate agenda.
Right. Or airplanes, like Schiphol, for example, emits more nitrogen, all of these things. It's just, when you ask the logical questions, you discover what their motive is. That's the only explanation I have for this. So any type of rational argument is dismissed by the government. Even when farmers talk, for example, about lowering nitrogen emissions through new technological advancements, things like that, they say, no. So it is about the land. That's the central idea here. They want the land. The farmers don't have an option to sell to anyone else. So it is about the state confiscating the land. And there are two reasons for that. One of them obviously being the one we just mentioned, migration. You can't have mass migration coming to your country, not closing the borders, and then expect that people can just, live on the street. So you need to buy houses, buy land to build houses, because our country's packed. So it's mass migration, that's one. And the other one, I think, is a more general theme where it is a very good strategy for a state to control the food supply in order to control the people. And farmers are incredibly independent people. They have a very lucrative business also in the Netherlands because we're incredibly good at it. So often these farmers have had their businesses in their family for centuries on end. It's in our culture, it's in our history. We are a farmers nation, and we're super good at it because we are the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world, even though we're such a tiny country, right after the US. So we're doing this very, very well. And I feel like not just, the fact that they produce the food, the fact that they have cattle, so, that meat is also being distributed. I think a lot of this revolves around the anti-meat agenda, for example. That's one thing, but it's also just kind of the struggle explaining this, but sort of the essence of farming. They're hard workers. They're often religious. They're honest people. They are independent. You can't really control a farmer. They own the land. They have their businesses. It's a very government independent sector and industry. And I feel like that is a harsh, hard to control group. And so they need to get rid of that group first. And with getting rid of that group, you also get to control a much larger group because you get to control the food supply. So it's basically, it's it's a two birds, one stone.
As you mentioned, the Netherlands, despite being quite small, it's one of the world's largest food producers and exporters. So what sort of effect is this going to have on the food supply, not just in the Netherlands, but the countries they export to? I mean, aside from the obvious of the government controlling this food supply, I mean, do you think people are going to see shortages, or what kind of consequences?
Yeah, there are already shortages in the food supply worldwide. And then coming after your second largest agricultural exporter can have no other consequence than making that worse.
So again, when I talk about this, I always say there is malintent in this. These people are malicious because even if it's not in the documents, obviously they're not going to write like, oh, we want to control the food supply to control people. But if you just, it's just a simple equation. It's 2 + 2 = 4. If you have food shortages everywhere and you're going to come after farmers that produce food, you're going to have more food scarcity. It's that simple. So apparently that's something they want. And I feel like that's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp, especially in my country where people blindly follow the government and really trust it. So absolutely, it has to have consequences. There's no other way. So they're going to be, the only thing that they can do is try and promote what they call alternative forms of protein. And you can already see that agenda being rolled
Plant-based
out
meat.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Plant-based meat.
Plant-based meat.
Bug.
Bill Gates also very funny. Funny, it's not funny at all, but it just shows the corruption of these people. Is the so this might get technical here, but the minister who pushes the nitrogen law that will expropriate all of our farmers, she has a brother-in-law that runs a online supermarket. It's like typically the type of 1984 type of supermarket that arose during COVID, where you can't go physically, and they were like, oh, we'll deliver everything to your door because it's safer this way, and it's cheaper because we don't have to have actual physical supermarkets. And it's totally scary. But anyway, this supermarket is owned by her brother-in-law and got a major investment last year of over 600 million euros from whom? Bill Gates. I remember hearing about that because it was in the press a couple of years ago. And we were like, why would Bill Gates invest such amounts of money in just a small up and coming, basically, startup in the Netherlands? And now it all makes sense. It all makes sense.
Because it's a big club and they're all in it working for their own self-interests. And we are inferior and deserve to be controlled in their eyes. At least that's what it seems like.
Yeah, because they're not the ones that are going to be eating the bugs. We are being told lies about who we were, who we are, and who we should be.
Any sort of repression for this decision?
Like yourself, I've been in right-wing politics or in the right-wing debate, conservative debate for a couple of years. So, I've seen it all, I feel like. But with this, yes, definitely, because what I was able to do, what I didn't really do before, was spread this internationally. And if there's one thing that the Dutch government doesn't like, it's people talking about them in a negative way to foreign press, because obviously here they control the press. There is basically no media opposition in the Netherlands. But then if suddenly half of America starts talking about Dutch farmers and their cause, that made them very nervous. So they came after me pretty harshly in the media again, which again, I'm no stranger to it, but it did grow to a new level. I had Dutch state-funded media call me a supporter of white supremacy because I held a bottle of milk in my hands. It's that type of insanity, really.
The symbolism. What did she mean by this?
I mean, like they literally say, "Oh, she holds milk, and that's not as innocent as it seems." There was a photo of mine where I was supporting the farmers, and I went to a local farmer and bought some milk, and they said, "Yeah, this is not just milk. This is a symbol of white supremacy." And she's a far-right extremist that propagates all sorts of conspiracy theories, such as the Great Reset and the Great Replacement theory, because claiming that the government needs to build houses for new immigrants is apparently the Great Replacement theory. It's like, that's how they try to frame this now. If you criticize it at all, you're in that camp. And what they're doing now, which I was actually quite shocked about, this week, there was a report that came out that was sent to our parliament about new terrorist threats in the Netherlands. So they were talking about a level 3 terrorist threat, which is like pretty high. And I read the report saying like, oh, are we talking jihadis? Are we talking the climate activists? Are we talking, far left extremism and violence coming from Antifa? No, of course not. It was all about, again, the farmers were mentioned by name. They said, although they are not violent, there are some agitators working. And they didn't mention any names, which obviously they won't do, but they said there's about
a dozen of Twitter agitators is the word that they used, who are fighting this debate internationally and nationally, and are spreading conspiracy theories and spreading the great replacement theory. And I was just reading that and I was like, this is exactly what the Dutch state media writes about me.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing. So one, again, 2 + 2 = 4. They're trying to now claim that people who oppose government policies, because that's what they say. They said anti-government activists are a potential terrorist threat. This is
This is what they say. It doesn't matter if you're peaceful and have always been peaceful and explicitly say that you are and that you just want to use your right to protest. If you oppose them, this is their new tactic. They try to slap the label terrorist on you in some fashion. And this is expanding internationally. And then it's also making it very difficult to travel internationally for anybody who is caught in these crosshairs.
Yeah, of course. Because I mean, it's very clear what they're trying to do. You know, if a government, and I wonder why people don't see this, but if a government says, oh, anyone who criticizes me is a potential terrorist, then, you know, and they use the sort of the cover of democracy for that as well. They say people who oppose state policies in this way, who question the legitimacy of our government, are anti-democratic. And then therefore they are potentially a terrorist threat, even if they're not violent themselves, but they could be the ones to inspire violence in others. You're just, I mean, screwed, excuse my French, but it's really dangerous because
absolutely.
they can use all sorts of legal measures against you once you are actually labeled as an enemy of the state. And they're definitely building that type of case against people who speak out.
Yeah. People want to get involved somehow to help and support them. What is the best way for them to do so?
Right. But if there's any group that I would say deserves your support specifically, it's the Farmers Defense Force. That's what they're called in English as well. So Dutch Farmers Defense Force. They are one of the more militant groups, I would say. They're not militant in the sense that they are aggressive in any way, shape, or form, but they understand the agenda that's being rolled out here very well. They know that this is not about nitrogen. They know that this is about their land, and they understand that this is about the Great Reset. And not all farmers in the Netherlands do. I've also spoken to farmers who don't see it that way, who still, you know, they question all the policies, but they're just like, oh, but the government must have good intentions. And I think that that's a very dangerous approach and a very dangerous idea to still have at this point.
I mean, you can listen.
Horrible story of what happened to a 12-year-old girl in Paris. Tell us about this young lady, Eva.
Yes, I woke up this morning to see the news of another young girl, European girl, who was sacrificed on the altar of mass migration. This is the case of Lola. She's 12 years old. She lives in the 19th arrondissement in Paris, and she was found dead this morning in a suitcase with her throat slit open and marks imprinted on her body. She was raped, tortured, and then eventually killed. And we have 4 people in custody. All migrants coming from Algeria, one of them supposedly also an illegal immigrant in France. And she is one of many. She's obviously not the first one. There are many examples that come to mind. And apparently this happens this is a 12th girl, I believe, in France that has been killed this year by an immigrant. And that's just France. We all know that there are many more. So I saw this poor little girl's face, and it just breaks your heart. It's horrible.
No, a 12-year-old girl, and as you say, marks imprinted on her body, which suggests that when these people are done with her, they finished raping her, they then harvest her body for body parts, which they sell. And we've already had reports in the UK of children going missing from some of these so-called asylum hotels. Western governments are actively collaborating with these gangs in child sex trafficking and the sale of body parts. Why is it that you can't even, in most countries, it doesn't even make the news?
It doesn't make the news because obviously these are the unwanted consequences of the policies that they are pushing. So they don't want you to know that their open border policies have these types of consequences. When we were talking about our government, but also about the World Economic Forum and about the idea of world governance, of course, wanting no borders, wanting one government, one people is one of their main goals. So then you don't want people to know what happens when you have open borders, and that the idea of one people, that the idea that all cultures are equal is actually not true, and ends up killing the most vulnerable and the most young and the most innocent in our society. But that is most definitely the case, and the people who speak out about it are labeled for that same reason far-right fascist. But there is truth to it.
Yeah.
This is something new that's been happening to our society. And every time you hear about it, there is a systematic overrepresentation of people coming from radically different cultures that do this to young girls. And we have to start speaking the truth about it.
Yes, we do, because we've lost the basic sense. People at one point used to understand. You're Dutch. You know that in Belgium there's historically been great differences between Flemish and Walloon. Even small differences can cause long-term problems. We're actually building up our own funeral pyre with this crazy open borders stuff.
Oh, yes, and absolutely. And like I said, the vulnerable and the young, our kids are the ones being sold out by the establishment first. And that is what you see here. And I just can't stand seeing another photo of another young, innocent girl, helpless girl on my social media feed anymore. I'm tired of repeating the same words every time, saying that I'm so shocked, saying that I'm so horrified. What needs to happen is these borders need to be closed. We need to know who is coming in, and we need to start sending people who do this and people who have no business being here back. It's that simple. But as long as that does not happen, as long as we keep electing people that are part of these organizations, such as the World Economic Forum, that want this, and that we understand that this is their plan. They want a uprooting of our people. They want the destruction of our identity, and they want the destruction of the nation state. Then nothing will change.
Well, you said it, Eva, that we're sacrificing our young girls on the altar of diversity. It's a terrible thing. It's an evil thing, and we should stop doing it.
I don't think that they are, because they didn't want this, out of thin air. They've been wanting this since the 90s. There was a poll conducted in the 1990s where also a vast majority of the Dutch people said, actually it was 64%, we are in favor of very strict immigration regulations. And they also said, a majority, that it was the largest mistake in Dutch history to be made to let in great groups of people coming from different cultures. So this is not something new. The Dutch people have been saying this for decades, but obviously it hasn't happened. Fast forward to 2015, the migrant crisis, the only thing that happened was more open borders, more people coming in. Now it is about 1,000 people a week that are coming in. And we obviously don't have any place to house these people because we are a very small country that is very densely populated. So the Dutch people are not being listened to. Like you heard our Prime Minister say, we need to exit the EU. We would have to have an exit in order for that to happen, which is obviously a total lie. This man doesn't care about the Dutch people's interest. He cares to cater to the globalists and to the immigrants and prioritize them over his own people. I hope you liked my little rant today. We are being told lies about who we were, who we are, and who we should be.